Gentlemen, let's get started. Today, our main topic, is error handling, logging, monitoring, and telemetry. Try to describe what is logging. What do I mean when I say, let's add logging to an application? What does that mean for you? Yes?
Do you have a username and password?
No, I'm not talking about log in. I'm talking about logging. Logging, yes. Every, let's say, operation is logged to the console. Why do you say console? It's not wrong. Yeah? Into a file. Now you said console, you said a file. Anything else? Did you ever hear, for instance, of the Windows event log? Mm-hmm. Would that be a suitable log target? Yeah. Okay. What if you have a server farm? Think of Google. You don't have one server, you don't have 10 servers, you have 10,000 servers. Do you think it's a good idea to log to the console? No. To log to a file on the local machine? So, what do we need? To a database, for instance. We could log to a database. We could use a NoSQL database or a SQL database and log into the database. What else? Let's stick with the database for a second. Do you think in 2021 it is necessary to build your own custom database to store logs? Probably not, because storing logs is really only half the way. Because once you have stored the logs, what do you want to do next? You want to analyze them, right? Why do we do logging? In order to find out what's wrong. You have an error, somebody calls you, hey, your stuff doesn't work. You have to find out why. And how do you do that? You look into the log. So just storing it in a database doesn't help you very much. You need to have a nice UI where you have some filtering possibilities and so on and so on. And logs are not a trivial thing, because we could just log a text for each request. But maybe you want to do a query where you say, give me all the requests where the HTTP status code was 500 and where the user was XYZ and where the client IP address was this and that. If you only have a text, it's really hard to find out. So what you want to have is structured logging, where you have different properties. Understand what I mean? So what you could use are specialized servers. Servers that are capable of receiving logs from a large number of servers. So if you have a huge array of servers running in the cloud, and you want to do logging for all those servers, you take the logs of all those applications and you feed them into a logging server that does not only store the data, but does also offer you strong capabilities for querying, for building dashboards and things like that. Have you ever heard of a widely used log server? Does Microsoft have such an offering? Yes. Yes? And it is? Microsoft has an offering which fits perfectly to ASP.NET Core. It's called Application Insights. Application Insights is a logging system which is part of Azure Monitoring. Azure Monitoring is a broader set of application and services for doing logging, monitoring, and telemetry. But the thing that we are going to look at today is a little bit in the direction of Application Insights. I'm not going to teach you how to use Application Insights in this course, because it would be too difficult to set everything up and to make sure that everybody has access to it and so on. We will use a smaller tool which we can install locally just to practice. But in real world, a log server like Application Insights would really be important. Now, you store all your logs to Application Insights. What do you use it for? What are typical use cases where it is super, super, super important to have all your logs in some kind of logging database? Yes? The server crashes and you want to find out why, right? Exactly. You can take a look, and what would you look for?
The last event.
The last event, because you think that maybe the last event, let's say it was an HTTP request, led to crashing your ASP.NET Core app. Okay, server crashed. What would be the reason why you take a look into the log? How do you even recognize that your server crashed? A customer maybe, of course, yeah. I mean, that's obvious. But is that what we want? That the customer recognizes the error? No. Yes? A server monitor, exactly. What you can do is you can set up health monitoring, which is typically done by sending HTTP requests to your API. And once your API does not answer anymore, it sends an alert. This alert can be an email, this alert can be a push message, this alert can be an HTTP request triggering some automatic healing process on your side, whatever this alert is all about. So health monitoring and logging are tightly integrated. We are not going to take a look in health monitoring currently, but keep that in mind. What are other situations where logs are super important? Yes, exactly. If you have an attacker, for instance, or you think there is an attacker, there might be an attacker. Something suspicious happens on your server and you want to find out who does that, and is that legitimate or is that a malicious attacker, for instance. Exactly, then you have to take a look at the logs. What are you going to look for in the logs? Imagine you have that situation, you have the gut feeling that something is wrong, and you have a huge database of logs. How do you find out if something is wrong? You could look for specific login attempts, but what are you going to look for? Just all login events? I see, login event that was not done during work hours. So you want to, absolutely, you want to find out if somebody did something which does not reflect the usual usage behavior of typical customers, right? Yeah. And that's the point. This is what I want you to take away here. That's a huge difference from my server crashed, where you want to take a look at specific events to find out whether you have an unhandled exception or something like this, while looking for a potential attacker means analyzing a larger amount of logs and doing for instance, a statistical analysis, or training a deep learning network so that it understands what is the usual behavior and detecting if something is strange, unusual. This is what you said. So machine learning is tightly coupled with logging. And systems like Application Insights do exactly that. Microsoft stores all the log records, bless you. Microsoft stores all the log records, and then they are training machine learning models so that these machine learning models understand what is typical for your app, and if something seems strange, they will inform you. I regularly get emails from Application Insights telling us that maybe something strange happened. The load of this web API has risen by, 25%, and that's not typical at that point in the day. Maybe this is something strange. And then you, as the application owner, have to find out whether this is a change in the behavior of your user or really an attacker. So crashing servers and attackers. What else do you do logging for? Yes? Debugging. What do you want to debug? Okay, so a functional problem. A customer calls you, for instance, and says, I expected the result 10 and your application said 12. What's the problem here? The term here, the third thing, is no replay debugging. Typically, if a customer calls you and says, I expected 10 but I got 12, what do? You hit F5 on your machine, you enter the data, and you look for the result. And maybe on your machine it says 12, exactly what the customer expected. But for whatever reason, your application in production is at 10. Now you have a problem. You can call the customer and say, I'm very sorry, I cannot reproduce this behavior, I have no idea why the application works like that, I'm sorry. But that is not sufficient. What you want is you want to be able to analyze problems without replaying. And that does only work if you have very detailed logs. So your application writes every single step to a log, database file, whatever, and you can step by step follow through and understand what happened. Why did the application say 10 and not 12? So debugging without having to replay the scenario is a very important thing when it comes to logging. Exactly. What else? What about performance? Customer calls you and says your app is slow. You press F5 on your computer, you spent 5,000 euro for a great developer workstation and it is blazingly fast. Then you tell the customer, I'm very sorry, on my machine it works blazingly fast, everything is okay. That will not help your customer. So, why is it important to have logging for performance analysis? Yes, what you want to have in addition to regular logging, where you have certain events. HTTP request came in, HTTP request came out. What you want to have are, on the one hand side, metrics, CPU utilization, memory utilization, network traffic, things like that. You could just install a small software probe, a software sensor that regularly measures the CPU utilization and writes the CPU utilization as a metric to your log database, so you can correlate the performance problem with your CPU utilization. And maybe you find out that the problem for the performance is that you simply have too many customers and the CPU is your bottleneck. Or you find out that memory is your bottleneck. Or you find out that disk I/O is your bottleneck. So metrics is another very important thing that goes beyond just application logging. And the other thing that you want to store in logging is timings. If you know the customer pressed a button and it took a minute until the application answered, that doesn't help you very much, does it? You might ask yourself, what operation in my application caused the delay? Was it the database query? Was it my own algorithm? Was it the web server doing something strange with my HTTP request? Was it some kind of queue where the request has laid in and it took forever until somebody picked it up? So you want to have some kind of X-ray built in so you can take a look what took how long. You want to have a time view where you see which request, which step in the request took how long. So that is another very important topic when it comes to logging. This is why I always say logging, monitoring, and telemetry. With telemetry, I mean metrics and timings and things like that. Monitoring means health checking, things like that, and logging, we discussed about that. Okay, do you think logging, monitoring, and telemetry is important in the practice? Yes? Oh yes, it is. Have you ever heard about the term DevSecOps, or simple put, DevOps? Yes, what is DevOps? No idea? Oh, that is important. We have to talk about that because that is very relevant nowadays when you do programming in the real world. In the past, old-fashioned companies, they work in silos. So there is an administrative department, let's say an operations department, and then there is a software development department. You might work in the software development department, and as a software developer, you are not responsible for running the application on the production servers. The administrators are responsible for running the applications on production servers. If you create a new version of your app, you have to take your version and ship it, send it to the administrators. And you also have to write a long documentation telling your administrators how to install your app. That is boring. The administrators will maybe not read your documentation, or your documentation is flawed, so things will break. What will happen? The administrator will angrily call you and tell you that your software sucks and it doesn't work properly. And it will be a constant struggle. So administrators want to have no updates, no changes, no bugs, everything's static, it should run. Never touch a running system. That's the mindset of a traditional administrator. And what do we do as developers? We love new stuff, right? We love preview versions. We love to update NuGet packages, although we have never tested the application properly. We love to build fancy stuff. So we are the opposite of a traditional operator. The traditional developer loves stuff, loves new things, loves to try things. Do you see the problem? We have two very different mindsets, and they are constantly crashing against each other. And that is the reason, has been the reason for in the last decades that in so many companies you constantly have a struggle between these silos. People running the apps, people building the apps, and when you think of SecOps, there is a third group, the people who have to secure the infrastructure. They would like to lock everything down. The internet is bad. Their dream is a server without a network card, because then nobody can break in. Do you think that makes sense? Of course not. So we have the security guys who want to lock everything down. You have the developers who want to use cloud services all over the place. And then you have the administrators who don't want to have any software, because if you don't have any software, nobody will call in the middle of the night. Problem, right? And you know what DevSecOps is? It's pretty simple.
All those things combined.
Exactly, all those things combined. You build it, you run it, you secure it. Your problem. You found a team that is responsible for an app, and this team has to build the code, has to run the code in production, has to stand up in the middle of the night if a customer has a problem, and this team is also responsible for securing it. Of course, in larger companies, there are specialists for security, specialists for development, specialists for operating stuff, and they can support and help the teams if they maybe don't have the necessary knowledge to do all these things. But at the end of the day, the responsibility is combined in a single team. So if you, as the developer, if you decide, hey, I don't care for logging, why should I do logging? I don't need that. Now you are suddenly responsible for ops too. Now you will get a call in the middle of the night that somebody crashes, your app crashed, for instance. So what do you need? Logging. So you feel your own pain. You decided not to do logging, and now you need logging. Or somebody is stealing data from you, and then your boss comes to you and says, you're responsible, you build it, you run it, you secure it, tell me if we have a hacker. So you feel your own pain, you decided not to do logging, now you have a problem. And that's the very simple idea. In modern organizations, you have a combination of development, security, and operations. And if you do DevSecOps, suddenly logging, monitoring, telemetry, and error handling become super important topics for you as developers, because you will feel the pain if you screw up in that area. Not some anonymous administrator caring for your servers. Understood? And you really have to have this mindset. In a DevSecOps world, what we also want to achieve is that you, as DevOps specialists, you really take responsibility for your apps. You are responsible for it. Your responsibility does not stop once you have written the line of code. It just starts there. You're responsible for compiling it, but it doesn't stop there. You're responsible for shipping it to all your web servers, but your responsible doesn't stop there. You're responsible for every technical problem, for every security flaw, for updating everything. If a new version of the Linux operating system comes out and fixes a critical security bug, who is responsible for making sure that you receive that security patch? You are responsible. And with you, I mean your team. Maybe not you personally, but your team has to take responsibility. Understand what I mean? In practice, you will find lots of companies out there who have not yet really understood and really embraced the topic of DevSecOps. Especially in large organizations, you still have organizations that struggle a lot because they are still thinking in silos. There are those security specialists who have their kingdom. Security is my kingdom and I am responsible and I let nobody in. Administrators, they love opening up boxes, unboxing servers, putting them into racks and dealing with cables because it's somewhat fun. You know what I mean? And it's their kingdom and they will let nobody in. And you as developers, you don't want to have sometimes the responsibility because that means you have to stand up at 2 a.m. in the night. You broke the main branch because you checked in flawed code. You have to stand up at 2 o'clock in the morning and fix it because your colleagues want to ship at the next day. That's real world. This is how DevOps works at the end of the day. Understand what I mean? Questions? Do you think it's fun to work in a DevOps team? Oh yes, it is. It absolutely is because you are responsible end to end. That's your baby. You can build it. You're responsible for it. You see it grow. You have access to the logs. You see the customers using it. You build a function and at the next day you can immediately take a look how many customers already clicked on that button on your website or your web app. That's extremely motivating. If you work in a siloed team, you write a little bit of code, then you build everything, you send it to the admins and you have no idea when this stuff is rolled out, if it works, if it crashed, if user liked it, you have no idea. And that's not motivating. But it needs a change of mindset. Taking responsibility is super important. And now let's get back to the logging, monitoring, and telemetry. Logging, monitoring, and telemetry is your friend because we want to have security information by analyzing our logs, operations information by taking a look at specific events or analyzing our log, and in the development area, we want to have information about feature usage. I built a certain feature and I want to know if I wasted my time. Because it's a waste of time to build a feature that nobody uses. And how do you find out if somebody of your customer uses that feature? Logging, monitoring, and telemetry, right? So many, listen to that, that's important. So many teams, they really invest a lot of time, a lot of money in building super high quality software. They are doing the latest and greatest technologies. They are building unit tests and integration tests and automatic software deployment. And at the end of the day, they ship something that nobody uses. That's a waste of time. Understand what I mean? That's really a waste of time. Don't waste your time. And how do you make sure that you don't waste your time? If you find out what people really need and what they really use. This is why Microsoft is constantly bothering you, asking you, hey, can we please download telemetry data from your computer to see what you are doing with Windows? That's why the Angular team in the Angular CLI, when you create a project, ask you, hey, are we please allowed to download telemetry data so that we understand how you use the Angular CLI so we can spend our time at the right features and not for features that nobody is interested in. Understand what I mean? That's the reason why so many companies go for software as a service. Because if you run the software on your servers, you immediately have access to all the logs. If you ship software to your customer and they install it on their computers in their data center, do you ever get something back from them? Do you have any idea what they do with your software? Well, probably not, because typically you don't get the logs. Understand what I mean? So this kind of thinking is super important, and that brings us to the importance of logging, monitoring, and telemetry for the development area. You have to understand your customers and what they really want and what they really use. Good? And what do you do with a feature in your software where you find out that nobody uses it? In a modern team, what do you do with that feature? Delete it. It's allowed, it's okay to remove features from a software if they are not used. That's okay. Unfortunately, most teams don't do that. They have spent weeks of development in this one report to generate it for the customers, and nobody uses it. And what do? They keep it in the software. That means they have to maintain it, they have to update it. Understand what I mean? Why do you do that? Modern companies remove features. That's okay. Sometimes it's okay to tell your customer, I'm sorry, only a few customers use that features, I had to remove them. Because we don't want to spend money on those features. Okay, so now you know why we need logging, monitoring, and telemetry. And now we will walk over to the laptop, we will create a web application, and we will add logging, monitoring, and telemetry to our web application and see how that works with ASP.NET Core. Fair? Good? Let's do that. Yeah, question?